I'm going to talk about government intervention in the pharmaceutical market. And basically, there are three things I want to cover. First of all, I want to say something about why there's government intervention in the pharmaceutical market. So why? Second of all, I want to say something about the types of government intervention we have. And third, I want to say something about the cost and benefits of this intervention, pros and cons. Those are the three things I want to cover. So first of all, why do we have government intervention? So in order to understand that, let's look at what is the level of research and development we will have in a free market. And I'm meaning a totally free market now. And in order to see that, let's draw a graph. And you have the amount of investment on this axis, amount of R&D. And let's say the cost of investing is a constant. It doesn't matter how much you invest, the marginal cost, the cost of capital is the same. It could be the interest rate, for example, because what are you giving up when you invest? Well, you're giving up your money for a certain amount of time in the hope that you get something back, right? And what could you have done otherwise with the money? You could have put money in the bank. So that's the cost of doing the investment, the cost of capital, the capital you're tying up. And it depends on the interest rate. A higher interest rate, for example, then you have a higher interest rate, then you have a higher cost of capital. So cost of capital, the cost is here. What's the benefit of the investment? Well, the more in the beginning, you expect high return on your investment because there's very little research that's done and there's a high investment, a high return on that investment because so little is done. But then, as you do more and more research, you have to explore more and more opportunities, and they're not as beneficial as the first ones you explore. So that's the marginal efficiency of investment curve. It goes down as the amount of research and development you do. In a free market, then, you will invest until you are in this point. That's the amount of research and development you will do. So it's basically a trade-off between the cost of investing and the expected return of investment. Let's say this is Q1. So it all depends on the expected return and the cost. And the problem is that in a free market, in a totally free market, the expected return is very low. Why is that? Well, it's because the pharmaceutical market is characterized by very high fixed investment. So let me give you some numbers here. Fixed investment is high. Usually it takes about 14 years on average to develop a new drug. So you have to wait for a long time. Second, it's been estimated that it takes about at least 15 or about $86 million to develop a new drug, to do all the clinical trials you have to do. So that's quite a lot of money. Only about 8% of all the drugs that are initially tried actually end up going to the market. But please take some of these numbers with a grain or even more of salt, because there's a lot of figures floating around and people have very strong interest in producing numbers saying it's costly or not so costly. So there are a lot of numbers, but it's enough to say it's very costly and it's a lot of fixed cost. So this means that this marginal efficiency of investment could be, it means that so this means that the cost of investing is high. The cost of you have to tie up, the cost of capital here is high. And then there's an additional problem, free riding. Because as soon as you have invented something, then it's possible to copy that drug. That's quite easy, actually. And it's been estimated again that if you copy a drug and to produce it, then you only had, it's basically 1% of the cost that the original company had developing the drugs. So then what happens then if you invest in a lot of money, 14 years, $15 million, and you produce something, and someone copies it? Of course, they will lower the price, and your return will be very low. The marginal investment or the marginal efficiency or investment will be very low because it's easy to copy whatever you invent. So the solution to that is patent laws. We introduce government laws saying that it's not legal to copy someone else's drug. But this, first of all, this is a form of government intervention to protect property rights. Um, but this intervention also creates another problem, which is you're essentially giving the pharmaceutical company a monopoly. And what happens when you give something a monopoly? What happens to the price? Let's draw this. Quantity, price. You have demand curve, which shows the basically how beneficial something, the marginal social benefit of something is explicit in the demand curve here. Then you have a marginal cost curve, and essentially is horizontal. It's horizontal because the cost of producing additional drugs is very small. Once you have invented something, the cost of actually producing a pill or pharmaceutical is usually very low. There are some new pharmaceuticals that have a different cost, but it used to be the case that the marginal cost was very, very small. Now, a monopoly, they will produce or set the price and the quantity, so the price is where marginal costs equal to marginal revenue. So we have demand, we have marginal cost, but we also need marginal revenue. And marginal revenue for a monopolist is a curve that goes something like this. That's a marginal revenue. So they will essentially produce at this point where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. Why is marginal revenue here? That's an interesting question. It's because when you're a monopolist, in order to sell more, you have to reduce the price. But you can't reduce the price on only the last product you're selling, unless you can do price discrimination here. But let's assume you can't do that. So you have to reduce the price. And when you reduce the price, not just on the last product you're selling, the marginal product, but on all products, you lose quite a lot of money. You still have a profit, of course, depending on where you are, but you have to lower your price on all the products. So that's why you get a marginal revenue curve, which is below the demand curve for a monopolist. Okay, so you'll be here, producing this much. The quantity for a monopolist. And the price will be this high. Price, monopolist. The problem is that this is not an optimal point. The optimal point from a social point of view is where the demand, the marginal revenue for society, basically, is equal to marginal cost, which is here. That would be the best point to be. So what happens then? First, you solved one problem by giving patent rights. But then you created a new problem because now the monopolist will produce at a point which is not socially optimal. Essentially, you're losing this area. That's a social welfare loss, the deadweight loss. That's a loss for society because they will charge a high price and reduce the quantity, and that's what's most profitable for them. So what you do? Well, you introduce new regulation. You have price regulation. For example, in some countries they have regulations saying that price of a pharmaceutical should not be higher than a certain percentage of the lowest price in some other countries. That's called a reference pricing system. But this creates a dilemma because on one hand, you have two aims. On the one hand, you want to stimulate research and development. You want to develop new drugs. On the other hand, you want to have a low price. So the strength of your price regulation has to take into account both these aims. And that's a dilemma that they have to face when you regulate and have government intervention in this area.